Welcome to the Rejuvenate Podcast. I'm your host, Chrissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host and the creator of Feel Younger and Genetic Insights, Elwyn Robinson. And today we are discussing the most important lifestyle changes to keep you feeling younger. So tell me, Elwyn, why did you want to discuss these topics today?
Thanks, Chrissy. Well, we recently did the 8 healthy habits that help you to feel younger. And I felt like with that one, 8 daily habits. And I felt that one was really good. And a lot of your success in life is built on daily habits. But there are also things that are not things you're necessarily going to do or even think about every day, which still have a massive effect on the quality of your life. That are, for want of a better word, lifestyle related. So not to do with things that you take or cleanses or diet or anything like that, but to do with how you live your life, which are absolutely crucially important. And so I want to share some that people are familiar with, but I also want to share some that I don't think that people usually think about in context of this. So I aim for probably at least half of these to be things that you may not have heard before, at least in terms of feeling healthier and younger. And so that's my goal, is to give you a new perspective.
Beautiful, Elwyn. So tell me, what is up first on the most important lifestyle change to keep you feeling younger?
Well, a way to feel younger that I don't think a lot of people are really aware of or think about is to practice accurate thinking.
I was going to say, can you let us know what accurate thinking, as you're speaking of it, means?
So I got that specific terminology from a guy called Napoleon Hill, who wrote a lot of books about success about 100 years ago, and probably the most well-known one is Think and Grow Rich, and I think it's like top 10 or top 5 best-selling books of all time. And he talked about a lot of stuff which is very common in the personal development, motivational world, like, making decisions and not giving up and all that kind of stuff. But I felt like the chapter that was probably the most overlooked, but actually the most important, is accurate thinking. So what do I mean by that? So a lot of people focus very much on, how much they're sticking to a diet or how much they're sticking to some kind of regime. But the truth is, if that diet is wrong for you, then actually the more you stick to it, the worse you're going to get, not better, right?
Very true.
And so this is the thing. If doubling your effort, doubling your discipline, doubling your motivation, doubling your speed to get somewhere only works if you're actually going in the right direction. And if you're going in the wrong direction, it actually only makes things worse. And this sounds like a kind of obvious thing to say, but it's actually a mistake that I have made over and over again in my life. And I've certainly perceived, almost every client, I would say, also do to various different degrees, going in the wrong direction. So what does accurate thinking actually mean? To me, it means perceiving things accurately, which is not as easy as it sounds. So first of all, we are inundated with misinformation, disinformation, outright lies, deceit by omission, and all the rest of it from all kinds of sources, both intentional and accidental, right? So I will give you an example that I've talked about before. I used to have a lot of vitamin A containing foods, both plant and animal, and also a lot in supplements. And I was wondering why I wasn't getting better. Well, if what we learned in the Grant Genero episode is accurate, for instance, and it seemed like it was at least accurate for me, because even by the normal medical standard, my blood test results showed that I had excessive amounts in my blood, so that's not good. And that's very widely scientifically validated that at least too much vitamin A is not good. But it's possible that actually too much is way less than we think it is, as Grant talks about. And so anyway, that's just one example. That's maybe controversial, that a lot of people may not have heard of or agree with. But if we give a diet example, a lot of people are trying to stick to a ketogenic diet. Maybe that's not actually a good idea. We've talked about that in previous episodes before. Maybe other people are the opposite. They're trying to stick to a, low-fat diet. Maybe that's not a good idea for them. And so obviously accurate thinking is not something that is easy to do, but it's something that should be aimed for. And so what I would say is there's no reason for people necessarily to not have the habit of seeking truth when it comes to health. And from what I've come across, they're earnestly seeking truth, most people. But here's the problem. we're not often seeking truth as a general mode of being, us human beings. I would say only a small minority of people are actually prioritize truth. A lot of people prioritize something other than truth, just even in terms of information. And so because of that, if you're in the habit of accepting falsehoods, then that is very, very, for all kinds of reasons, which if you want to, we can get into, then it's very easy to also accept falsehoods when it comes to health.
Right, that makes sense. So what I'm hearing is really you need to do the thinking for yourself, gather as much information as possible, and then you're going to be the ultimate decider after having done that looking into it.
Yes, but what I'm also saying is you have to be in the habit of seeking truth in general for you to be good enough at it that you will also do it and be good at it when it comes to your health or your fitness or your diet or whatever it is that you're focused on. So a lot of people, almost everyone says that they are interested in the truth and that they want the truth, except for in certain situations, right? I remember, I got fooled by this, and it was actually a client of mine that pointed it out. When it comes to weight loss, I'd say, God, I've had all these clients who eat this, certain diet and they still can't lose weight and they're putting on weight. And the client goes to me, she goes, they're lying, Owen. I said, what? She goes, I had a friend round yesterday who said that they'd strictly stuck to their diet for a month and they were literally eating cake in front of me. And when I pointed out that they were doing it, they just said, shut up, name, whatever it was, Linda, or whatever.
Yeah.
So it's like, so that's an example. And so, I mean, there's a whole, school of the whole body of scientific research about this, but there's cognitive dissonance, there's delusion, there's all kinds of ways that we don't think accurately, and it really gets in our way. But I would say the very first starting point is to, and this is why I say like a lifestyle habit, like a lifetime habit, of to seek truth at all costs. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean that you spout it out all the time. That's where you can often get in trouble, right? Saying things that you believe to be true to certain authorities can get you thrown in jail, contempt of court or whatever. Saying what you believe to be true to, your boss or something similar can get you fired. But also, even if that person has no position of power over you, saying what you believe to be true to a partner, a sibling, one of your children, etc., can hurt their feelings. And so that cannot necessarily be a good idea. And so I think that a lot of people have quite bad associations with like 100% honesty and 100% truth because they connect it with, being rude, inconsiderate, impolite, the idea of truth being sharp, the idea of it being painful. Delusion and fantasy are often preferable to truth. We've talked about this a little bit before, about if you have, for instance, parents who are maybe abusive, maybe neglectful, maybe they traumatize you or whatever. There's a lot of people who have that upbringing who, facing the reality of how bad their upbringing was, how bad maybe their parents treat them, maybe it wasn't their parents, maybe it was someone else, maybe it was aunt, uncle, grandparent, whatever, is so painful, but especially if it's parent, it's so painful to realize because you're so utterly dependent on them that there's a few different ways that you can react to that. But one way is to just go into fantasy, go into delusion. Oh, I've got a great childhood, I've got great parents. And then, and a delusion in that case might be I'm the problem, right? So often children blame themselves. So, the parent is abusive and the child is like, oh, it's my fault. If only I'd have, whatever. Another example of that, maybe there's no abuse of the child, but the parents divorce, right? And the child thinks that it's their fault. So that's one type of delusion, is to believe that everything is down to you. It's kind of narcissistic in a, not clinical way like we talked about before, but just in a thinking the whole world revolves around you, which is not only typical, but actually healthy and normal for a child to feel that way, that everything is down to them, everything is their fault. The other end of the scale of that is nothing is my fault, right? So we talked about that before, where people with actual narcissistic personality disorder, for instance, They do not take responsibility, not genuinely, for anything. Everything is always someone else's fault because the idea of them making a mistake or being wrong or whatever is so damaging to their sense of who they are that they can't face it. So those are just a few examples, and we can talk about more, but there's a lot of reasons why people actually don't prioritize truth, maybe because they want to feel like that they are, very in control of their life. And so the idea of things being outside their control is, not something they want to face. Maybe it's the opposite. They want to feel like they're perfect. And so the idea of them doing anything wrong, they can't face. Maybe it's they want to believe that a parent or an authority figure is perfect. And, my mother, my father said to do this. And so therefore I still do it now, even though it's actually a bad idea. All of that kind of thing, right? It can get very, very, very complicated. And maybe, we shouldn't talk about the endless ways that people can not love truth. But I would say a love of truth is actually a prerequisite. And who else has a love of truth? Kids, children, before it's kicked out of them. And I know they like to fantasize, and I know, they like to play games and stuff like that. But you know this, Chrissy, like a child who has been relatively unrestrained, who hasn't been beaten down and told to shut up and told to keep quiet and all the rest of it, is always like asking questions and trying to understand stuff. And they're very
curious.
Yeah, very, very curious, and curious to know what's true, right? And also quite, again, if they've not been beaten down, quite like, what's the word? Not skeptical, but like questioning, quite offended by lies, right? Much more so than adults are generally. And often, again, that gets beaten out of them, but in various ways, not necessarily physically these days, but, it gets conditioned out of them. Let's just say that. But so, yes, curiosity is a sign of youthfulness. And yes, play is a sign of youthfulness. So I'm not saying you have to be all rigid about, facts 100% of the time. You can absolutely play and have fun and play pretend. I'm not saying that. But when it comes to actual serious topics that matter, to prioritize what's true over. And so we talked about, prioritizing truth over feelings. Well, whether you should prioritize telling people the truth, even if it hurts their feelings, that's kind of a tricky one. That's a judgment, right? And you may well not do that. You may say, you know what? This person asked me, do I look fat in that? Or does this look good on me? Or whatever. And you can say, you look great, even if you don't believe it. Because why not, right? You don't have the right to necessarily hurt their feelings over something fairly innocuous. But what about what you tell yourself? And that's really what I'm talking about. Like, do you tell yourself, oh, I've stuck to my diet 100%. I don't understand why the weight isn't coming off. If that's not true, that's more what I'm talking about.
That reminds me of going back to our episode on addictions where you talked about unbending will and the, well, not pacts, but those things that you say that you will do for yourself. You're breaking that trust or that bond. You're not being honest. So yes, that's a big part. That was a really big eye opener for me too, because it also becomes that sense, I think, as well, where people will sometimes just say, well, I didn't mean it. I didn't mean that. It's like, well, then say what you mean. Like, what is really there? Like, let's have the honest conversation, not in the sense of, like where you're talking about where something honest is going to hurt somebody, but really not, but being truthful, saying your truth, speaking your truth.
At least with yourself, right? Maybe you can't be true with anyone around you because they're all, have a position of power over you and they can hurt you, That's possible. It's an unpleasant situation to be in. You should escape that if you're in that, but it's possible, right? But if no one else, you can at least be honest with yourself, right? If everyone else is being abusive to you and they force you to say how lucky you are to be with them, maybe you just say that out loud because that's the easiest solution until you escape, right? But if nothing else, you can at least say to yourself, but this situation is abusive and this is not okay and I deserve to be treated better, right? For instance. And so absolutely, I think what you said there about integrity is a great point as well, right? If you're in the habit of lying to yourself in terms of saying you're going to do something and then not doing it, or saying that you're going to do something and then pretending that you did do it, all of these kind of games. So why do we do them? So we talked about maybe we lie to someone else because it makes them feel better, or we lie to someone else to protect ourselves, and maybe that's okay. Yeah,
but like you just brought up that point, why do we do it to ourselves?
Yeah. So do we need to protect ourselves from ourselves? No. It's really to make ourselves feel better in the moment. That's what it is, right? So a delusion, a comfortable lie is there to make you feel better. I guess the clue is in the word comfortable. It's easier to lie to ourselves than to be honest, right? It's if we're the type of person who likes to feel like we're in control, then it's easy to lie to ourselves that it's all down to us. And in fact, maybe often it isn't. There are things outside our control. If we're the opposite and we like to blame other people, it's easier to act like it's someone else's fault rather than recognize your own part in it. It's easier when you say you're going to do something and then not do it to make excuses rather than go, you know what? I said I was going to do it and I didn't. I've really let myself down. That's bad. I need to make sure not to do that again. So here's the thing, and this is why even when I say it accidentally, sometimes I like to correct myself. There's no such thing as a negative emotion. There is such a thing as a painful emotion. And the point of a painful emotion is to have a learning experience. And so, often, let's say if you say you're going to do something and not do it, what you might feel is shame, right? Shame that you lied, shame that you failed, whatever it might be. Shame is a very unpleasant emotion. As we talked about, in some cultures, like honor-bound cultures, people would literally rather kill someone or kill themselves rather than feel intense shame. So shame is something that people really want to avoid. But as we talked about, if you base your whole life around avoiding shame, that's actually one of the classic hallmarks of narcissistic personality disorder. It makes you a nightmare to yourself and everyone around you. Most people obviously don't have that, but a milder version of that is like avoiding the feeling of shame and making excuses. I didn't have any choice and whatever, right? And when you do that, it soothes you. It soothes the shame. It takes the shame away, but it also robs you of the learning experience of going, maybe I shouldn't promise something to myself that I'm not willing, or not committed to following through on. Maybe I shouldn't, say I'm going to do something and not do it. Let's just keep it at that, keep it simple. So.
No, that really makes a lot of sense, especially holding yourself accountable. It's that accountability too. And sometimes we let ourselves get away with so much.
Yeah, absolutely. But also holding others. As I said, some people do have that opposite tendency. And I'm more like that. They want to feel everything is down to them because taking responsibility is empowering. The more that you take responsibility for things, the more empowered you are. So it's why I generally recommend it. But you can start with taking responsibility for things that have nothing to do with you. And then you're going to feel guilty and ashamed and like a failure all the time. when a lot of things.
That's not what we're saying.
There's nothing you can do to control that, right? A lot of people have that again with, as I said, that often goes back to childhood stuff with parents. Like, the reason why, my parent is horrible and shouts at me, or the reason that they neglect me and abandon me or whatever is because of my behavior, right? And that's where people-pleasing behavior can be rooted in, and being unwilling to confront, being unwilling to assert yourself, being unwilling to put up boundaries, all that stuff we talked about recently in previous episodes. All of that can start with believing that you're responsible for everything, rather than, this person's behaving this way because they're screwed up, right? Maybe they have their own issues, and maybe there's something you can do to make them behave a little bit differently, but fundamentally, they're always going to be that way. I mean, one of the most painful realizations, I would say, is realizing that a parent never really loved you and never will, because they're simply
doesn't have the capacity to.
Yeah, because not because you don't deserve it, they're just not capable of it. And a lot of us put a lot of effort into avoiding that realization, understandably, because it feels like when you're a child and dependent and not without some validity, that if your parent doesn't love you unconditionally, then you might not survive. And there's absolutely true to this. Kids are abandoned, to the point of death every day by parents, still in the human world, and certainly in the rest of the mammal world as well. So it's very, and so it's very compelling to create a fiction that your parent really loves you. It's very compelling to create a fiction that if only you were good enough, then they would really love you. But the truth can be harsh, but also, as Jesus Christ said, the truth will set you free.
Absolutely.
That's the other side of it. Like, you can't escape any of these bad situations as long as you're not seeing them accurately. So we talked a lot about the kind of psychological childhood kind of stuff, because that's often where the root of it is. But this absolutely applies with all of the choices that you make, whether it's, not exercising enough, or eating the wrong foods, or not following through with any kind of health protocol that you said you're going to do, or whatever, right? And we've got to make sure we choose the right thing, which is part of the accuracy as well. But the other one is, we've got to be honest with ourselves, and also be honest with ourselves about how it's going. Another example of this is people who do something because it was recommended to them, not because they're being lazy or anything, and then it makes them feel worse. And then because the person recommending it is maybe some degree of narcissist, they would say, well, if it's not working for you, it's your fault. And so let's say, right, it's a 10-day fast, right? Or juice cleanse or something. Okay, try it. After, let's say, 4 or 5 days feeling terrible, and then the person says, oh, it's your fault, you haven't been following it strictly enough, or you haven't been doing this, or you've been doing too much of that. And then to say, oh, yeah, okay, that must be it. It must be a detox reaction. It must be because I didn't do this or something like that. Rather than just go, this is a bad idea for me. That's also possible, right?
Something to consider.
Maybe my blood sugar is already unbalanced. Maybe I'm already low in nutrients, and this is, even less, or whatever, right? So being oriented towards truth is super important. Now, here's the other thing. How do you identify truth? This is not an easy thing, of course.
Yeah.
It's not an easy thing. I would say that in terms of all the stuff we talked about here, obviously, if we're talking about working out a math equation or something, it might be different. But in terms of all the stuff we've talked about here, the thing that really helps us identify the truth is what's called a gut instinct. That's what we really need. And so...
Well, a lot of people... I was going to say, because, I have a good grasp, I think, learning more of what that gut instinct is, but some people don't, or some people's automatic is to deny that aspect of that gut instinct. So I would also like you to, as you explain this gut instinct, delve a little bit into that too.
Yeah, we will definitely, depending on what order we release this, we'll cover this in detail with the different personality systems, because there are several personality systems who really don't have connection to their gut instinct. And then there are some that do, and they generally tend to do quite well in life because of it. And there are some that do, but they tend to fight it. They're in a constant battle with their gut instinct. So maybe that's more what you were referring to there, Chrissy.
We'll get into that in that episode for sure. So we'll put that link below for sure. But so carry on, like the identifying truth and that gut instinct.
So the gut, gut can be anything from like solar plexus to underneath the navel. It's quite a kind of broad area, but there's something in your digestive system, something in what kind of feels like your core, which will tell you what is and isn't true for you in that moment. And of course, it is moment dependent. Something could be good for you today and bad for you tomorrow. So you could listen to your gut today. Is this a good idea? Yes. You could listen to your gut tomorrow. Ask it the same question. It'll say no. It wasn't wrong either time. Maybe it was good today. It isn't tomorrow, right? So as I said, generally people who tune into that, it's not that they make no mistakes and have no failures, but they have less, significantly less. So I can't claim that it's perfect, because this is kind of an instinct, and our instinct, like anything, does need to be developed through experience. And again, it's developed through experience by what I just said. So the more that you have experiences, don't lie to yourself, experience painful feelings. That's a learning for your gut too. And very quickly, your gut will actually get really accurate. But if you don't listen to your gut and you deny yourself painful feelings by lies and delusions, or by taking drugs, by distractions, by addictions, all that kind of stuff, there are many, many ways that we avoid those learning experiences, then that gut is never developed. And so I'd say people who have suffered trauma and abuse and then who start taking drugs early, often when they stop all of that and start to recover from the trauma and abuse, they have kind of the emotional intelligence, which is kind of what we're talking about here, really of the age that they were before any of that happened. Because the trauma and abuse and neglect can freeze a person in their emotional development. And then the drugs basically stop that emotional development through the same mechanism I just said, which is through blocking painful feelings, because you take the drug every time you feel bad in order to feel good again, you're then not having the learning experience. So some people, when they really have disconnected from their gut instinct, when they start, the gut actually is not super accurate yet. Because they've never.
Yeah, it's going to take some practice.
Yeah, they haven't had that experience develop it. Same with conscience. A conscience, I remember listening to Jordan Peterson. It really showed me this. Like, a conscience isn't foolproof either, right? A conscience may say, especially when you're younger and inexperienced, oh, don't do this because it's bad from quite a simple moral perspective. And then over time, you may realize that there's a bit more nuance and shades of gray to things. And so a conscience also develops with time. And conscience tends to be more a heart-based thing, whereas the truth instinct is more of a gut-based thing. So these things do need to develop. They develop with time if you are honestly and presently engaging with life and the world and your own feelings. But so many of us don't, either because our childhood or some point of our past, usually childhood, was so painful that we shut down, we couldn't handle it.
Off. Yeah.
Or sometimes, even with drug addiction, even some people get into drugs just because, they're carefree and open and stuff like that we talked about with personality types, even when they don't have major trauma. And then still, so long as you're using that drug on a daily basis, it kind of stops that development. So, yeah, accurate thinking, although it sounds like actually it's something that most people struggle with a lot. And so some people who recommend this will also say, don't listen to anyone, don't listen to gurus or whatever. I don't think that's quite true either, until you've really developed that gut instinct strongly, because it's ideal to find, several role models, and could be for different areas, right? You might have role models for this particular area of your health, or this particular area of your finance, this particular area of your relationships. You may have many role models in total, but someone who you perceive, and again, you're gonna have to do your best and be willing to have learning experiences, but someone who you perceive has more accurate thinking than you in this particular area, who can give you guidance and help you to get there, right? As much as we ultimately learn more through failure than success, we do also learn from success, right? If you've, for instance, if you grew up in that horrible environment where no one was nice to you, no one cared about you, no one was loving towards you, etc., you probably learn more through just having someone be kind and caring and loving towards you than you do from facing the pain of all those other people not doing it, So it's good to, I found it's helpful to have advice from people who think accurately on various subjects, so you can do what they recommend, have successes in that area, and go, it is possible to succeed. That's also a learning experience that's very important.
Yeah, no, that's a very, very good point. So accurate thinking, if you're not exactly sure how to do it, find somebody that's potentially an expert in that area of where you're wanting to develop that accurate thinking, and learn from them and develop that along the way. And it may take some time. And also developing that gut instinct of learning what that particular truth that is right for you as well. Wonderful, Elwin. So what is next on the list of most important lifestyle changes?
So I think that something really empowering to really transform your life and feel a lot better is to empower your outlook or your perception. And there are two specific tweaks which I highly recommend. So, first of all, focus more on what you want than what you don't want. Second of all, focus more on what you can control than what you can't control.
Okay, those are really two good distinctions there. So, because most of us are focusing on the stuff we don't want. I don't want to be poor. I don't want to run out of money. So if we're focusing more on what we want, and then also focusing on the things that we actually can control. Because again, a lot of us, a lot of times, are focusing on all areas and avenues of stuff that is completely out of our control.
Yes. And we can take this philosophy I just said too far, as we talked about in the previous section. If we only focus on what we want and we ignore all the problems in our life, then they will eventually blow up in our face. And I've met a few people who are like that. Similarly, if we only focus on what we can control, and we ignore everything that we can't, then again, that may blow up in our face. However, The vast majority of people I meet, which is why I give this advice, they are definitely way far on the other scale. Most people, myself included, at least from my baseline, could do with focusing more on what they want and less on what they don't want. Why? Because what all the personal development people say and spiritual people say, new agey people say, like, anything from Tony Robbins to Joe Dispenza to a law of attraction, was it Abraham Hicks, all that kind of stuff, is that when you focus on something, it's more likely to happen. The exact mechanism by which this occurs, there are many, many theories on it. I won't bother giving any of them in this because they're all unproven and potentially spurious. But what we do know is that it absolutely works. That's a fact. How it works, we're not 100% sure. It could be as obvious. I'll just give very broad outlines. It could be as obvious as if you're more likely to hit a target that than you don't know. So, for instance, if you're trying to get to London from wherever you are, if how to spell London, how to recognize it when you see it, you're more likely to hit it than if you don't, right? So if it's in your mind, and also, maybe you're in the middle of, north of England and there's not that many signs for London, so you've got to really be eagle-eyed for it. Well, you're going to spot the occasional clue that gets you there if you keep focusing on it, because then you're going to notice it. You notice what you focus on more. That's the other thing. So it could be something entirely mechanical like that. The other end of the scale of saying why this works is because you literally manifest what you focus on. That the world is not material, that beyond the world of the material, that there's actually kind of like a causative world, maybe a mental world, an astral world or whatever, that the physical world is the end product of that, and that everything starts in that mental world. And so you can create something in the physical world by focusing on it enough in the mental world. As I said, whichever perspective you believe, it doesn't matter. The point is this works. This works, anecdotally, in many, many, many testimonials of people who recommend these kind of systems. But it also works in more regimented methods. So in business and also in the armed forces, they've done numerous studies where people who rehearse achieving something over and over again in their mind are much more likely to achieve it more easily, more quickly, and more successfully, more likely to be successful than people who don't. So it's absolutely a good idea. Now, the what you can control thing is also important because, of course, as I said, most people don't do it, but you can take the focusing on the goal too far because you do actually have to do steps to get there, right? That is the other thing. To some degree, I mean, sometimes these things really do fall into your lap like magic, and that has actually happened to me many, many, many times. But that cannot be relied upon, that something's going to fall into your lap like magic. Usually, you got to actually do something. And so in terms of what you do, a lot of people will focus on things that they can't control, and I don't understand it. So I'm going to give an example. A lot of people focus on things like chemtrails and other things like that. Let's just use that one as an example. So I'm not saying I don't believe in chemtrails, but they are, if they exist, which they probably do, they've absolutely littered the Northern Hemisphere. So really the only thing you can do to avoid them is to move to the Southern Hemisphere, especially quite far south from the Southern Hemisphere. Other thing you can do is in your house, run a very good quality air purifier. So at least, or in your office building, if you work in office or whatever, where you work, run an air purifier. In your car, run an air purifier. Other than that, there's nothing much you can do about it. And yet I see people obsess about it and worry about it. There are other things I won't talk about because they're even more controversial than that. But again, if you can't avoid it, if you can't stop it happening, what's the point in focusing on it? That's my perspective, and it's why I would say, we talked about personality types recently, and I just did a test again, and again, I come up with quite low in neuroticism. And I think it's for this reason, because this is my philosophy. Like, if it's no point focusing on what will go wrong, except for to prevent it. But there's no point focusing on it a lot, and there's no point focusing on what you can't control. Like, there's just no point. So it's an indulgence. That's how I look at it. Now, the higher you are on that scale of neuroticism, which is a personality trait, which is tested for in traditional psychology, the more that this advice is going to be hard to hear. However, the higher you are in that trait of neuroticism, the more important this advice is, the more crucial it is. The amount of people who I see self-sabotaging themselves through not following this advice when it comes to health is a lot. And ironically, it's especially a lot in the natural stroke alternative health world, whatever you want to call it. There's a lot of focusing on, the government is forcing me to get this thing, right? I won't go into any more details than that. I remember hearing someone who was worrying about that, and they were worrying about it. I would say they probably worried about it over 1,000 hours. And while they were worrying about it, they were chain smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol. Now,
Right, yeah.
I'm not saying that thing was not potentially really bad, but I'm saying I think thousands of hours of worrying and chain smoking cigarettes and drinking alcohol statistically is worse. And yet that is what a lot of people do, or do the equivalent of. A lot of, we talked about this before, I stick to things once I say I'm going to do them. There's many reasons for that, but it's nothing to do with my virtue. It's just to do with my strategies, is my opinion. I know one of the reasons people don't is because they feel bad. And then the only method that they know to not feel bad is, taking drugs, eating junk food, or whatever it might be. They just want to feel better. Now, first of all, as I mentioned in the previous section, it's better to just let those painful feelings be there, because it means you have a learning experience and you can grow and develop as a person. But which I realize is easier said than done. I struggle with that too. But then, second of all, it just doesn't help. It doesn't help to focus on these things. It just kills your well-being. And so I do know, as I said, I know a few people who do the opposite. They will probably compulsively avoid focusing on anything bad. That's not good either. But so I'm not saying you should be extreme on the spectrum, but I'm saying most people could do with being less neurotic.
Yeah, it's a good point. When I started listening to Abraham Hicks, that really helped shift my mindset and my way of thinking and how I spoke to myself, because it really helped re-educate my neuroticism in that way. Because I'm the other side, definitely more higher on the neurotic side, or the neuroticism in my way of thought. And since doing that and shifting it, because I'm not avoiding the things that I need to avoid. What I'm doing is I'm shifting my perception on how I am perceiving or thinking about those things, which has then moved me out of that worry, fight or flight space and more into the, okay, well, things are going to work how they're going to work. Things usually, pretty much work out pretty well. So, and I'm making this very vague here in this minute and probably not using the best words, but shifting from, oh my God, what's going to happen, to, hey, maybe there's a reason for this, and it's probably going to be just fine. Two totally different ways of being, and also from a health standpoint, because over here, I'm triggering stress, I'm doing all these other things, my hormones are going to go off balance. Over here, it's like, yeah, okay. So, whereas instead I would be making decisions based from fear, it becomes more making decisions based from potentially inspired action, where I'm like, okay, well, what about this? That sounds pretty good.
Absolutely. Yeah. And what you said is, it goes back to the biochemistry that we've talked about many times before. If you're focusing on what you don't want, it's stimulating cortisol, adrenaline, and that will increase inflammation and all kinds of other issues if it's chronic. Again, if you're doing it all the time. But if you're focusing on what you want, it's stimulating dopamine. And so that's the good biochemical. That's actually going to get you to what you want. So just to give one practical advice before we go to the next thing with health, one of the things I commonly see is, and I've done this too, people get so lost in, oh, what's the problem? What's wrong with me? Maybe even how can I fix what's wrong with me? But all of those questions are coming from that negative place, that stressful place. A better question is to go, and I try this with clients, and often they have no idea how to answer the question, which shows how far away they are from this type of thinking. Like, what do you want? So they're coming, I've got digestive issues. Oh, I've got, this infection. I've got this. I've got that. I've got low energy. Okay, what do you want? And then the person has to do the conversion in their mind. Oh, okay, I guess I'd like to have great digestion. Oh, okay, I guess I'd like to have great energy. I guess I'd like to have great mood or whatever. But that's not what they're starting with, right? Whereas actually the starting point should be, I would love to have a great mood. I'd love to feel great every day. Or I would love to have great digestion. I would love digestion to be effortless and be able to eat anything and still feel good, Like coming from that perspective is... And then you can still say, okay, and what's getting in my way? What's stopping that from happening? It doesn't mean avoiding the problem, but it's not the right starting place to go, oh, what's wrong with me? What can I do? Even though it's very natural.
No, that's really, really, really good, Owen. I like this one. So tell me, Owen, what's next on the most important lifestyle changes?
So something that you're not necessarily doing every day, but which is really beneficial to help you to feel younger, to feel your best, is to always be considering what toxic elements you can remove from your life. So a lot of the time, our natural tendency, predisposition is to focus on what to add, right? What to take, what to do. Now, I realize, in the world of health, there is a bit of what I can remove, certainly in the area of diet, right? Gluten-free, sugar-free, low-fat, vegan, meaning no animal foods, carnivore, meaning no plant foods, et cetera, et cetera. So there is quite a focus in the area of diet on what to remove, but I would say that we need to be a lot more broad than that. So yes, that is a good question, right? And I think we should do an episode on this soon, Chrissy, like how to choose what to eat for you, because it is different for every person. So focusing on what foods you shouldn't eat, that disagree with you or don't work for you at that time is a good idea, and I highly recommend it. As I said, we'll do a whole episode on that. But what about everything else, right? And I see people focus so much on food and so little on other issues. What about cleaning products that are being used around your house?
Very much so. Very much so. Yeah.
What about the clothes that you're wearing? What about what those clothes are, washed in or whatever? What about the other stuff that you're putting on the skin, whether it's makeup, whether it's, moisturizers, lotions, et cetera, et cetera? What about the air that you're breathing? What are you breathing in? Is it mold, spores? Is it smoke? Is it dust? Is it, viruses and bacteria maybe? Is it, industrial pollutants? Is it VOCs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? It's a big deal. What about the liquids that you're taking? What about the water you drink? But also, what about the steam from the shower or maybe even bath that you're breathing in, right? And also absorbing through your skin. And then all that's physical. What about the emotions that you're taking on from other people? What about...
Absolutely. I was going to say, we just did a whole episode on people and the relationships that maybe aren't, supporting you and your vitality. And so that's also something to consider as well.
And I started that episode by saying that it's possible that a toxic person in your life is worse for you than any amount of, smoking or eating junk food. And I absolutely stand by that. That's could 100% be true. But even outside of that extreme, just in general, there may be someone who is, in your life who is, just as mentally healthy or unhealthy as you, for instance. But, they just do this thing that really brings you down. And maybe... it's not reasonable to ask them to stop, but maybe it is. And that's something you can consider, like complaining, right? You could just say, could you limit complaining or, not do it all the time or whatever it may be, right? Especially if, if you're not doing it and they are, that's a lot more of a fair thing to ask, for instance, because that complaining can really get you down, right? It's negative. Maybe it's disempowering beliefs, right? Someone who keeps walking around with an attitude of, oh, I can't, this isn't possible, this isn't possible, this isn't possible. And then when you talk to them, they're, unfortunately going to do the same with whatever you want to do, right? Oh, they're going to try and convince you it's not possible, that it's not a good idea or whatever. So, there are so many examples of this. I would call all that, toxic attitude, toxic mindset, toxic beliefs. Maybe even a spiritual attitude. Maybe that's, going a little bit far, but if you're surrounded by people who indulge in vices, and consider that to be no big deal, even though they treat you great and don't necessarily do anything bad to you or say anything bad to you, but they're an alcoholic, for instance, or they're a smoker, chain smoker, or something like that, right? Maybe just that influence around you is not good for you, or they're doing something else. Any of the other vices we talked about, like gambling and prostitution and porn and whatever, right? Theft. Just because they're not treating you badly doesn't mean they're not a toxic influence if they are heavily involved in some kind of criminal or something world and they're, a significant part in your life. So I'm giving lots of examples. I suppose a different way of saying this would be move towards purity. Purity is not something that is considered to be desirable, really, in our culture as much as it should be and as much as it used to be. But in fact, it is a highly desirable thing to have purity. Obviously, people realize it's good to have pure air and pure water, but it would also be good to have more pure, as in less, less manipulation, less dishonesty, etc. Yeah.
More truth.
Yeah, more truth, more, kindness, etc. in interactions with people, right? So removing anything that's unpure is part of life, I would say. And I think in a kind of degenerate, vice-filled society, you're kind of convinced that that is not right, that you're being judgmental or intolerant or whatever. But you have the right to have boundaries, right? You don't have the right, certainly from our modern perspective, to go around judging other people and telling them how to live their lives. That's true. But you do have the right to say, I don't want it in my life, right? You can do whatever you want, but I don't want it. You can think however you want, but I don't want to hear about it, and so a lot of people are afraid to do that for various reasons that I guess we won't go into because it's quite complicated, but we'll talk about that in the personality episodes more. But at least do your best. A lot of people, again, like with the truth orientation, people aren't even thinking about an orientation of purity, except for, as I said, maybe in one limited arena, like with food, they're trying to purify their diet. But what about everything else? And you'll find if you purify not in a harsh, judgmental way, but just in a loving yourself way. I love myself, and therefore I do not want this in my life, or I want less of it in my life. Anyone who is reasonable and who's worth keeping around will respect it. Even if it's, maybe it's inconvenient to them or whatever, maybe they won't love it, but they will respect it and accept it and, not blow up the whole relationship.
Yeah, that's a good point. They respect where you are. You've established a boundary, if you want to call it that, and they go, okay, it's like we don't have to do the same thing, so I respect that. That's fine. Yeah, because then that moves it. So it's like also too with food. It's like that. There's that saying, eat clean, and then we could also throw in think clean, and just like having that cleanliness as you're referring to it, purity. Then it just keeps everything. It just feels good. I think it just really feels good.
It absolutely does. And as with my other advice on this episode, it is possible to take it too far. It's possible to, prioritize purity above all else and kind of, end up maybe Howard Hughes like or something, not leaving your house with your air purifier and your purified water or whatever. So I've realized that people can go too far with it. But again, in our culture, a vast majority of people are not going far enough. And it shows, we are being inundated with toxicity on all levels, I would say, not just physical. And we are so used to it, we don't even see it. Just like a fish doesn't recognize water because it's all they've ever known. So start to look for it, start to reduce it, and you will feel better, as you just said. Absolutely, Chrissy.
So, Owen, what is next on our most important lifestyle changes list?
The next thing that I would really encourage people to consider working on if they want to feel younger, and this might be one of the most important ones and the biggest ones, and I would like to do a separate episode on it, but I wanted to touch upon it here. So we just talked about removing toxic elements from your life, but removing toxicity, specifically trauma, from your body is probably one of the most powerful things you can do for your health and well-being, from my perspective.
So when you speak of trauma, like what are you talking about specifically? Like a physical trauma that somebody's receiving or something else?
So yeah, it's a good question. Um, Trauma from a strict mainstream medical perspective or scientific perspective, it doesn't so much exist in what we call the body, it exists in the brain. But the brain is part of the body. And the point is, it's useful to act as if the trauma is in the body, in the muscles of the body, even if it's technically not the case, even if it's technically controlled by the brain. So we are going to do a full episode on this that I refer people to. If we've already released it, then we'll link to it to really focus on this issue. But in a nutshell, I just want to do a little review of the issue. So when we have trauma, one of the ways that it impacts us is in how we think. And so that's more considered a brain issue. But the other way that it impacts us is in our body, specifically how we hold our body. So there tends to be chronic patterns of tension and sometimes also chronic patterns of flaccidity. What the two have in common is that in both cases there is a lack of awareness. So for instance, someone who has been beaten down many, many, many times will rarely walk around in a posture like with chest out, head back, like proud and strong. They're much more likely to be...
When you say beaten down, do you mean physically or verbally?
Both. Okay. Either both. Yeah. They're much more likely to have a posture, shoulders up, maybe forward, maybe head down, maybe tail tucked in. And so this is and you'll see this with an animal as well, with a dog, for instance. You know, if you shout at them because they've done something wrong, they'll immediately go in that kind of submissive, scared posture. Well, some people live in that posture because they've been beaten over and over again in whatever sense, and they're expecting punishment at any time, at least, if not at all times. And so they're kind of chronically ready for it. Well, that holding pattern of tension in some muscles, lack of any activity in others, has massive effects on the health of the person. So, for instance, you know, one of the areas that tightness often manifests is in the neck. A lot of people have neck issues, and so that can manifest as a lack of blood flow to the neck and a lack of blood flow to the thyroid. And we've talked about how thyroid issues are, you know, probably overlooked as a massive issue. A lot of people have that tension because they're kind of hunched forward. That means a chronic tightness in their abdominal muscles and a chronic lack of strength in their lower back muscles. And then they tend to have a lot of lower back pain and a lot of digestive issues, both very, very common. And by the way, I think it's 5 times more common in people who've had physical abuse during childhood. They're 5 times more common to have those, 5 times more likely to have those issues than people who have not had physical abuse during childhood. So the research absolutely shows all of these illnesses are much more likely to occur, and more. I've just given a couple of examples there. But all illnesses are much more likely to occur in someone who's been repeatedly physically abused as a child. Why? Right? I mean, technically, you know, if you're 40 or 50, it shouldn't really impact you anymore. Now, they put it more down to the brain, and I think that's part of it because it will affect how you think and it will affect your behavior. But a big part of it is also just physical, and that's the part that tends to be overlooked by mainstream, you know, psychology, psychiatry. They'll tend to only focus on the brain and maybe that kind of heart-brain connection, but they don't focus so much on the body. They don't focus so much on the gut. They don't focus so much on grounding, those kind of other issues. And so there are some modalities that do this that are mainstream. Probably the most well-known trauma that is the most mainstream that is still working on this mechanism I'm talking about is EMDR. So EMDR only really works on releasing some of the tension in the muscles around the eyes. And yet it can have a really profound impact because it turns out that when you are traumatized, one of the parts, the muscles that become frozen, it's not just like big things, like I said, like your shoulders and your back and stuff like that. It's also, there's a lot in the face that happens as well. And the eye muscles and the throat are particular areas where tend to be very impacted by this. And so just freeing up that tension in the eye muscles while remembering traumatic experiences can create profound shifts. And so this is based on the same mechanism. There are loads of other systems out there, though, that work on this. that work on the body to various degrees. But what the ones that work have in common is they're bringing awareness back to that area of the body. And so awareness is really the brain. And so, as I said, technically we could say it's really the trauma's in the brain, not the body. But the crucial thing seems to be it's more the central nervous system, and it's specifically a lack of connection between the brain and these areas that have chronic tension. So to use the example that we said earlier, someone has a lot of they're like this because they're expecting an attack and they're kind of cowering, hunkering down. They don't realize they're doing it. And even if you tell them they're doing it, they may be in their rational mind, in their prefrontal cortex, they realize they're doing it. But if they then try and not do it, they struggle. And so maybe they go to a trigger point therapist, they go to a massage therapist, deep tissue, like to try and like get rid of that tension. And it might provide some relief for some period of time. But usually it will just come back again, especially in a stressful situation. And the reason is because it makes sense, rather than stretching and massaging and all the rest. If you have chronic tension, all you really need is your brain to say, stop doing that to the muscles, right? But that doesn't work. So therefore,
why do you think it doesn't work? Just because it hasn't been addressed, or the resolution of the emotion or the trigger of what happened?
It doesn't work because that connection between the brain and that part of the body is offline. That's the way we look at it in these particular modalities, which I recommend. And so originally it was on purpose, right? The brain said, you know what? We need to be in a state of readiness, of being beaten at all times. And so let's just be in that ready state, right? But then eventually, maybe no one's beating you anymore. They haven't done for years or decades, and you're still ready. Why? Because the brain's kind of forgotten that it put that in place, and now it is disconnected from that. Right. So what the modalities that work really do, from my perspective, and I'll recommend 3, but there may be many more that I just don't know about. But what they all have in common, even though they're very different in surface appearance, is they're all training the brain to be aware that there is that tension. And they all do that not by relieving it, not by stretching it, not by, massaging it or whatever, but by actually heightening it.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. I just need to take a moment to quickly tell you about a way that you can support the podcast by getting high quality, affordable supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is they have great quality products with minimal fillers, but the prices are very affordable. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're really helpful and friendly. And what I love most of all is the amazing descriptions Elwin's written for each product category about that topic. There's so much information and education on it. I've actually learned more from reading their product descriptions than I have from most articles. So, to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, you can use promo code RejuvenateMe for a 20% discount off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order with promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net. So bringing more awareness to that you're actually, hey, wake up, you're doing this thing.
Exactly, by making it more extreme. So for instance, if your tendency is to be like this, the natural inclination when you realize it is to try and drop them, right?
Yeah, your shoulders are, bring them down, but then they just start going back up again, right?
Exactly, as soon as you're not aware, because that's the kind of default pre-programmed hardwired position that you're now in. And so the better thing to do is to raise them up and hold them for a very long time until the muscles are actually screaming at you like it really, really hurts. It shouldn't be a sharp pain, but like the pain of exertion, lactic acid buildup, and then to slowly release. And then the brain is like, I can do that. And if you do that over and over again. So I won't go into any more detail on that. As I say, we'll do a whole episode on it. But 3 modalities that are really good are Bioenergetics by Alexander Lowen. I have to add that because there are other things calling themselves bioenergetics. So Lowen Bioenergetics. Counter Strain is a different one. And then Hannah Somatics is the third one. The difference, I would say, is Counter Strain is the most gentle. Bioenergetics is the most intense. Bioenergetics is something you can easily do on your own, or fairly easily. Counter Strain requires a practitioner to do it to you. Hallucomatics is kind of in the middle. You can do it on your own. You can have a practitioner do it to you. It's not as gentle as one. It's not as intense as the other. So those would be the kind of options that I recommend.
Now, I was going to say, so because we're talking about getting trauma out of the body, and I wanted to ask, why is it so important to get this trauma out?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, as I said, let's just start with physical, because physically, any imbalance like that, any imbalance with tightness in one area or flaccidity in the other is going to, let's focus on the tightness, is going to affect blood flow to that area. Whenever there's chronic tightness, there's chronic blood flow. There's going to be less blood flow in, less blood flow out. That means less nutrients coming in, less waste going out. Over time, that will cause a buildup of lactic acid, which causes pain. So one of the common end results, and often, the trauma may have started when you're 2 years old, but you don't have the pain till you're 40 years old. It can take a long time. But most people, by the time they're age 40, I believe it's over 60%, have chronic pain of one type or another. I believe my understanding is this is one of the main causes. And it's certainly the cause way more often than most people consider, which is not at all. If nothing else, it's a significant contributing factor, even if they're mechanical things. Because some people are like, I had an injury there or whatever. It's like, okay, but injuries should heal. An injury shouldn't hurt a year later. It shouldn't hurt a decade later, right? In the vast majority of cases anyway, there's always exceptions. So if it still hurts, it's because there is this tendency for chronic tightness. Now, as any kind of fitness, personal trainer, physio kind of person will tell you, areas where you have chronic flaccidity also creates a problem. Where you have chronic weakness, where you have chronic, lack of tone, that can also create pain. So chronic pain is really one of the big ones, and a lack of blood flow. So if a gland gets a lack of blood flow, it means you're going to be creating less of that. Less blood flow to the testicles, less testosterone. Less blood flow to the thymus, less immune function. Less blood flow to the thyroid, less metabolic function, right? So, et cetera, et cetera. So those are the two big reasons. All disease and chronic pain specifically would have this either as a contributing factor or an outright cause. And I'm actually amazed at how often outright cause is a better description than contributing factor. As in, when you do this work, it really works. Now, annoyingly and unfortunately, a lot of practitioners who actually teach this stuff or do this stuff to you in this day and age will not say that. Sometimes it is because they are wary about making claims that will get them in trouble, which I understand and respect because I am in the same position. But I think also it's because they're focused more on other stuff. So a physio is only focused on pain, for instance, but they're not going to tell you that lack of blood flow to this organ or gland is causing your whatever issues, right? So I think it's a combination of fear and possibly just ignorance, like they just don't know. But the outcome is really profound if you actually address and resolve these issues, even only partially. So if you have a tendency to be like this, and then naturally you'd be like that, but now you got to there, that's still going to be a big, big, big improvement to your level of pain. Your pain will probably be gone by then, and also to whatever dysfunction that's creating. Because you have these cranial nerves that run through the neck, so actually they affect, the whole body and the whole system. You get your vertebrae, obviously. So, that's the other thing, because the spine and the central nervous system affects every other area of the body. Just a little bit of tension here or a little bit of tension, there or something like that can create these profound knock-on effects in other areas that you wouldn't even think of. So it really is a big deal to undo this tension. And yes, osteopaths, massage therapists, chiropractors, et cetera, they can all help, but often they are not addressing the root cause, which is this trauma. Now, when I say trauma, you have to be willing to have uncomfortable feelings come up, but you don't necessarily have to remember any traumas unless it comes up spontaneously. This is not about, because the people who are against focusing on trauma say every time you remember a trauma, you're re-traumatizing yourself all over again, because your brain, your nervous system can't tell the difference between reality and fantasy in many cases, or memory. And so you remember something awful happened to you, it's traumatizing you again. This is true if you are doing it consciously, I would say. It's not true if you are not trying to do that at all. You're working on your body and then a memory spontaneously comes up. If it does, just breathe, be aware of your body, let it pass, and you'll find that you're much lighter and freer on the other side of it. Yes, if you are just indulging and focusing and thinking about this horrible thing that happened to you, that will probably just make you worse and worse. It's very different.
Yeah, no, this is a really good point. I mean, one of my trainer, he has me roll out, and there's, God, there's just so much pain in the body that I was like, oh, okay, there's some stuff here. But yeah, it's it's interesting how the body. Well, what's that book? The Body Keeps the Score, of how, showing and saying, yeah, everything I've always thought everything's in this body. It's your biggest and best tool, and it's trying to tell you things all the time. So we just got to pay attention, and as many things that we can do to help listen and support the body to move through, then like you were saying, we can get higher quality of vitality to the cells and every aspect and the organs and everything, other parts of our body, so that we can, have an optimal way of life physically, because it's, even though it's also like what's going on mentally and emotionally, but ultimately the end goal is that this vehicle that we have is going to carry us through. And so how well is it going to carry us through?
Yes. It's actually amazing how much you can tell about a person just from observing their body. And if you're open to that, but don't really know what I mean, I do recommend reading the books by Alexander Lowen. He has some theory, but he has a lot of stories of telling this client and they had this tendency. And so because of that, I knew this and this about them. And, once you've read enough of the examples, you kind of get it and you start looking yourself in the world or looking at yourself and you can see, oh yeah, this person has this tendency. This person has a tendency for, large upper body and small upper body. This person has a very, small waist. This person has, pronounced twist or, a tendency to be leaning in one direction or another. All that kind of stuff will tell you something about the person's character, crazily enough. So it kind of makes you an expert, not so much body language as in, not what is your body saying with the specific thing you're doing right now, but more what is your body saying with the way it is all the time. Like that's saying something very interesting as well.
Yeah, definitely something to look into for sure in a deeper level. Beautiful, Ellen. Thank you. So what is next on our list of most important lifestyle changes, Ellen?
So something that's really important to enjoy your life and feel young and youthful and vital is becoming emotionally in tune and living true to yourself. So I'll take those one at a time. Emotionally in tune means aware of how you're feeling. That sounds, again, quite obvious, but it actually isn't a lot of the time to some people. And I would definitely count myself as one of those people. A lot of people who are genuinely emotionally in tune as well, I found, are genuinely emotionally tuned, but then maybe oblivious to one emotion or two emotions. And one example is often I find that people who are generally emotionally in tune are unaware of one emotion, and it's anger or sometimes disgust. Like they're unaware of this feeling inside themselves. So I would say you're only as strong as your weakest link, and probably the emotion that you're least aware of feeling is your weakest link when it comes to your health and energy. And so why? Because you do so much to avoid becoming aware of that feeling that impacts you negatively in general and probably impacts your health specifically. So someone who doesn't want to be aware of feeling anger, so first of all, they're becoming less aware of their body in general. And so when you're less aware of your body, you're not going to get the body signals about what to do and what to not to do to be healthy. Second of all, anger often is an indicator that either you need to assert yourself or that you need to put up a boundary, that someone is trying to violate you or invade you. And so now, I'm not talking about the person who is angry every 5 minutes about everything. That's different. That's someone who has taken it too far. I'm talking about the natural, healthy expression of anger. Natural, healthy expression of anger is to either assert something that is important or is to protect yourself from the feeling of being invaded or literally being invaded, punched in the face or whatever. And so when we suppress that feeling of anger, on a practical level, we're more likely to say yes to things that we don't want to. We're more likely to accept things that we don't. And so we're more likely to put up with bad behavior from other people, which then negatively impacts our lives. We're also more likely to put up with abuse. We're more likely to put up with being oppressed. We're more likely to be put up with being taken advantage of, being manipulated, being lied to, all of those things. Second of all, in order to suppress that feeling of anger, we often have to indulge in all kinds of behavior, which is very literally, obviously, and directly destructive to the body, like drinking alcohol, smoking, binge eating large amounts of food, especially unhealthy food, but even any food, if you eat a lot of it, is not going to be good for you. It's going to overload your digestive system and stop everything working as well. And by deadening our awareness to that feeling, it also, and this is actually probably the biggest impact that I see, by deadening our awareness to anger is also the motivating force. So what I see all the time is people who, if you ask them if they feel angry, they say never or rarely. Those are never dynamic, passionate, highly motivated people. They are people who tend to say they suffer depression, they have a lack of energy, they struggle with motivation, because it's the same thing. If you're suppressing anger, you're also suppressing dynamic drive, passion, enthusiasm type energy. And so there's a really, really big impact. And that's from just suppressing one emotion. Well, what happens if you suppress a bunch? Like I used to do.
Look out.
Yeah, you're going to be in a really, and probably, I don't know, still do to some degree, right? It's really one of my Achilles heels is not being aware of how I feel. And it's really, really a bad idea. So one of the things that helps you to be aware of how you feel is to be more aware of how you breathe, which we talked about before. One of the things is to get that trauma out of your body, which is why I talked about it in the previous section. Because when we talk about trauma in the body, what we're really talking about more is areas of lack of awareness of the body. And so often, the body is in a particular position. So the example I gave is if someone's in a, protecting themselves position, so then they're in a state of chronic fear. And so generally then either they experience fear all the time, or sometimes it goes the opposite and then they're never aware of fear. It's again like the fish in the water thing. If you experience fear constantly, then actually that becomes normal and you're not aware of feeling any fear. And that's even worse, actually, than feeling fear all the time.
Let me ask you this, Owen. If somebody I know it's going to be awareness, but what if somebody isn't even aware that they're doing it? Like, what are the steps that they would take to become aware? And then so on and so forth.
So a lot of the elements I've already said are actually relevant. So first of all, you have to be looking for truth, right? If you're more focused on feeling comfortable than finding out the truth, then you will probably never discover these feelings inside yourself. So that's the first thing. Once you are actually focused on finding truth, then it's the stuff that I talked about previously about becoming aware of the body and doing the kind of work on the body that I recommended. And when you do that, you will start to have those feelings come up. I actually believe, the type I recommended, I obviously think is best, but actually any intense movement of the body will tend to bring feelings up. I believe that one of the reasons that people avoid exercise, and it's not the only one, but one of the reasons why people avoid exercise, if it's not because of physical pain, it's not because of an injury or because of chronic pain issues like I talked about earlier. If it's not that, I believe it's actually because they want to avoid feelings. Like Tony Robbins says, emotion comes from motion, right? So just going for a run or lifting some weights, especially if it's engaging the lungs fully. One of the ways that we block ourselves from intense feelings is to block our lungs. Now, we don't want to be deep breathing all the time. We talked about that in the Buteyko episode. However, we do want to let ourselves breathe as vigorously and deeply as we need to when we do intense exercise of any kind. And so I believe that's one of the reasons why people avoid it. So moving more, doing intense exercise, which we'll talk about actually as another step, and then especially doing body work to actually get in there, asking the question, and then working with a qualified and, more importantly, competent therapist of some kind who understands this stuff that I'm talking about and wants to, so not a behaviorist, even though they're great for what they do, but someone who's looking to really help you understand what's going on inside you. There are numerous modalities that all focus on that, but one of them, they will help you to have that realization for yourself. Because if someone's avoiding anger, there's no point telling them they're angry. They won't listen. Like, you have to experience it for yourself. It's not easy. There's a movie that I really love about this called Anger Management. With Jack Nicholson. Have you seen that one?
I think it was a long time ago, but yeah.
It's about a guy who thinks he's just trying to be nice and trying to be a good guy, and that he's not angry. And then he has this therapist played by Jack Nicholson who constantly is provoking him in a very comedic way. And near the end of it, he has a big epiphany, and he realized. Actually, a lot of Adam Sandler films like this. I think Waterboy, and there's probably a bunch of others of like someone realizing that actually they have a lot of anger deep down, and how accessing that actually helps them be better. In the case of anger management, I think he finally proposes to his fiance or his girlfriend or something. And in the case of the Waterboy, I think he wins a football championship or something. But the point is, like, both of those things, like proposing and winning a football championship, the thing that they have in common is the person has to be willing to have some dynamic energy to assert what they want, right, and claim it. And so, again, that's not possible if you're oppressing that anger. So I know that these are like silly comedies, but I actually think they have some profound truth behind them.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I remember when I was starting my acting classes here in LA, and it's you're accessing certain emotions, and not that I couldn't access anger, in my performance and things like that, but what it was really also triggering, because for me, anger was something that I really never let myself feel or, to be honest, express, really, and in a very healthy way. And so then that was where one of the other students, she passed me the name of somebody. She's like, this lady really helped me with it. And I started seeing her, and it was just really profound when I was able to begin to identify that emotion, not be afraid of it, embrace it, and then also be able to express it. And that was really, really beautiful and wonderful. And it's been very, very helpful.
Yeah, that's fantastic. It's not easy work. I commend you for it. I focus a lot on anger because that's very common. And in this day and age, it's probably the most demonized emotion. But it could be of anything. And, just to do a counterpoint, it could be vulnerability. People who are very comfortable with anger are often very not comfortable with being vulnerable, admitting that they need help, admitting that they, feel weak, that they feel scared or whatever. And so that's crucially important to be aware of those kind of vulnerable feelings. So whatever it is for you, it may not be something obvious, but whatever it is for you, and, the kind of thing that you're talking about, right? Like being an actor, I think, is a good way of learning that, because to be a really good one, you have to be able to do the full range of emotions at will, right? And you will find quickly the one that you're blocked with, or the ones that you're blocked with that you're not able to access. So yeah, it's a good way of doing it. Maybe some acting classes. It's a good tip.
Yeah, absolutely. You were talking about becoming emotionally in tune. You also said live true to yourself. So do you want to delve a little bit into that one?
Yeah. So just quickly, because there are obviously some people who are aware of how they feel, but they ignore it. So that's the other option. So awareness doesn't necessarily mean honoring it. And so I would say it's becoming aware of these feelings and then honoring the validity of them. Now, this is tricky. For instance, if you have been, highly traumatized and you've suppressed all your anger because you want to please people and you don't want to get beaten more and all the rest of it, you don't want to get punished more. Well, then when you first start feeling angry, you'll probably start feeling angry at a lot of stuff. You'll be, triggered, and it may not be appropriate in that context, right? That person may not deserve it. That situation may not deserve it. And so living true to yourself doesn't mean just freely going with those feelings, which may not be relevant to the personal situation, but it does mean honoring that that's how you feel. That's your crucial distinction. So people feel with feelings that there's only two options of what they can do with them. I've noticed this so much. with so many people. You can either express them in some way or you can suppress them, right? So if I'm angry, I can either shout at someone or, bash my steering wheel in my car or whatever, express it in some way, or I can swallow it and, take another drag of a cigarette, eat another donut, distract myself on social media, whatever. The golden key to actually being free of these emotions, though, is neither of those things. It is feeling it, breathing, and staying aware of your body. Those are really the three key elements. Just feeling it is not bad, but it's actually very difficult to do just that. But if you also focus on breathing, perhaps yes, deeply, even though it's generally not recommended, breathing deeply and being aware of your body and being aware of where you feel it in your body, that really is transformative. If you do that, the emotion, no matter how intense it is at least bearable. If it's very intense because it's been very suppressed for a very long time, maybe you'll feel it for hours or even days, but it will pass eventually. And then you learn that it's okay. Because one of the reasons we suppress those feelings is because when we first started having them, they were so overwhelming. Often, if we're really young, if we had abuse at a very young age especially, and you have a feeling, and so, anger becomes blinding rage, and fear becomes absolute terror, or sadness becomes utter despair, right? And these feelings are so overwhelming. It's like, I feel so much despair, I might kill myself. I feel so much rage, I might kill you. I feel so much terror, I might just die of fright, right? That's how we feel. We feel like I might die. And so therefore the defense mechanism is rational and reasonable. And so we have to have that experience, and sometimes it's repeatedly, of I can just breathe and carry on feeling my body and being aware of my body, and then the world doesn't end. I don't kill you, I don't kill myself, I'm okay. Now, sometimes for people who are really traumatized, the emotion is still too much to handle, even when they're adult. And that's why it is important to work with a professional and make sure that you don't deal with it. You don't bring up more than you're able to handle in the moment. But generally, for most people who don't have serious mental illness, serious issues, the technique I just said works.
Yeah, no, I know in my own way, definitely, like, for instance, like I had just something that triggered me on a Friday, and I was like, oh gosh, I'm not going to be able to speak to the person I need to speak to till Monday. And I could feel the nervousness, you want to call it the anxiety or the stress, the tension physically in my body, the worry about it. And so what I practiced, or, is something from Abraham Hicks, this little saying, everything is always working out for me. Another friend taught me this as well. She said, the universe is always conspiring for you. And so what I've, through another modality, a person that I work with, she taught me, like you said, become aware of it and then bring the attention and the awareness to it. But what has also helped me is saying that phrase, everything's always working out for me, repeating it over and over and over and over to myself, whether it's verbally or silently, until I can feel the body shifting, until I feel myself working through the emotion and working through and understanding that, yeah, everything is always working out for me. And just that helps me get through to that next point instead of just staying stuck in that emotion or that uncertainty that I don't know, instead of, because otherwise if I just lived there the whole weekend, that would have ruined it. I still had little peaks of stuff coming up, but I just went back to that mantra and to feeling it and to being with it and being like, hey, it's okay. Everything's working out for me. It's okay. It's, just, and going through it. So that's my little tidbit there of what helps and works for me.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up. So I would say that's an alternative strategy, which is also very valid. And that's called self-soothing. So one of the reasons as well why these emotions are so intense as a child and unresolvable that we block them out is because we're not soothed appropriately by whoever is meant to be doing that, and therefore we don't learn to do it for ourselves. And so I would say it's a different strategy that has its own value. It's just different. One of them is more about learning to accept a feeling. The other one is more about learning to be able to soothe yourself. Actually, they're both key skills that we need. So yeah, thank you for bringing that up.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code Rejuvenate. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code Rejuvenate for 20% off today. No, absolutely. No, it's a really, really, really good lifestyle to bring in. So no, thank you. So Elwin, what is next on our list of most important lifestyle changes?
So this is a strategy which I have already talked about, so I'll talk about it quite briefly, but it's very important, which is maintaining clear boundaries with people. And the crucial element to this is having it be a door, not a wall or not a brick wall, and not a open window either. So meaning, when we just accept whatever kind of behavior from other people, or let's say other people, pets and animals, I guess, as well, technically, then we open ourselves up to being abused, being manipulated, being taken advantage of, being ignored, etc. And as a result, inevitably, even if it's unconscious, feeling resentment, feeling victimized. However, if we do the opposite, if we have too much of a barrier and a boundary, if we are too much judgmental, if we are too intolerant, if we are too ready to say no, and that's not okay, and that's not good enough, and that's not right, etc., then what we do is we cut ourselves off and isolate ourselves, which is probably what people who don't like to do it fear, and the reason that they don't do it, right? And so the crucial thing about both of those strategies to understand is they're actually two sides of the same coin. So someone who overreacts and doesn't accept anything and says no all the time is actually coming from a similar place to someone who underreacts, accepts everything, doesn't say no to anything, that they both do not feel confident enough in themselves to be appropriate with the situation. And so it's kind of like an immature strategy to navigate through life, and especially interpersonal relationships, but that creates endless chaos and drama, really on both sides, which creates stress chemicals, which prematurely age you. So generally, the more disagreeable people will be very pro boundaries and saying no, etc. The very agreeable people will be the opposite. But no matter what your genetic type is in regards to that, or what you identify with in terms of self-testing, you need to try and find a way to get more to center, because it's all ultimately a emotional reaction that really comes through, I would say, a lack of that maturity. Because here's what they both have in common. In fact, let me ask you, can you guess what they both have in common, Chrissy?
An inability of decision making?
Yeah, absolutely right. Yeah. And I'd say more specifically, though, you're absolutely right, a lack of connection with their own core. Or to put it another way, a lack of connection with their own gut instinct. Because think about it. If you had a gut instinct which you're connected to and which is reliable and trustworthy, why would you say yes to everything? Because some things have to be bad. But on the other hand, if you had that gut instinct, why would you say no to everything? Why would you shut everyone out? Why would you keep everyone away? Why would you not accept? Do you see what I mean? In both cases, it's the thing that it has in common, even though it looks like completely opposite behavior, is that it is a lack of connection to your core, a lack of connection to your gut instinct. It's a lack of trust in yourself to really get down to the root of it. And now, this may sound a bit judgmental. Of course, a lack of trust in yourself is understandable if you have not had an upbringing which has taught you to develop that.
Precisely. If it's been, every aspect of that has been negated and you've had to just go with whatever somebody else has said because that was the safer option for you, then yeah, that's understandable.
Yeah. Or if you're in a position where you had to react and defend and push away everyone, right? For a similar reason. Maybe you went to a private school and everyone was bullying you, and so you learned to keep everyone away and all the rest of it. Then that it totally makes sense that that's what you do, but it is so damaging, So having too much boundaries, it isolates you. It's been proven that one of the best things that has been proven to create happiness and also is a big determinant of longevity is your relationships with other people, especially intimate in the sense of high trust, close relationships with other people, much more important than lots of superficial relationships, lots of Facebook friends or whatever, or even the real life equivalent of that. And yet, if you say yes to everything, then, or don't say no to everything, or to too much, then you're much more like, you're going to be literally like a moth to a flame. Predatory and abusive types will be drawn to you. There's a whole community of people who feel this way. They call themselves empaths. This is not totally wrong that, that because you're highly sensitive that you are preyed upon more, but it's kind of a perspective I notice that a little bit sometimes evades responsibility, because the truth is, if you develop boundaries, then you would be able to keep those people away. Some people, by the way, are both. I have been both. I have been on one hand, like overly strong boundaries, and then with almost everyone, and then simultaneously letting in predatory types and letting them do whatever they want. And that's not that uncommon as well. If you have that childhood that is highly abusive, and yeah, you just have both of those things going on. Sometimes you can have both. So if you're like, oh, I don't know what type I am, I can relate to both of those, then sure, you may well do both. You may well switch between them, and because the behavior has the same core, as I explained, of lack of trust in self, it's not that surprising that a person could switch between what seems like such totally opposite behaviors.
Well, especially if you've got that predatory type that's coming in and under this manipulative false way is like, oh, let me help you. Like, okay, because then there's trust and, you're mirroring or giving that. So it's understandable how that could happen. Yeah. So essentially what I'm hearing is when you're saying a door, not a wall or a hole, or, something like that, or brick wall, it's because it's changeable. Like we are the ones that are in control of that boundary, or is there something else that you're meaning there?
Yeah, so basically, imagine you live in a city, in a house where there is just a hole in the wall and anyone can walk in and out whenever they feel like it. That's not good. Now imagine you live in a city, in a house, and there's no way for anyone to get in and out. That's not good. And yet that is what most of us do with boundaries. So the point of a door is you can open it when it's appropriate to let someone in, and you can shut it when it's appropriate to keep them out.
Beautiful. I like that. Yeah, that's really, really good. Okay. So Owen, tell me please, what is next on the most important lifestyle changes list?
So this one leads nicely from the previous one. This is a habit to stay healthy for as long as possible and happy, which I highly recommend. And this is something that I think that almost everyone has trouble with. So even if you can't relate to some of the ones I've said, you'll be able to relate to this. Learning to listen and negotiate conflict and disagreement in a healthy way. So,
bravo, bravo, bravo.
I'll talk quickly about the benefits of listening. Some people are really good at listening, some people aren't. As we talked about, I would say that the people who are called introverts, ironically, tend to be quite good at listening, and the people who are called extroverts often aren't, because they're more focused on what they're putting out rather than what they're taking in. So the value of listening, of course, is that you can understand other people better, you can learn, and also generally people like it when you listen, and they don't like it when you don't. So that's the simple explanation. But how it relates to conflict and negotiation is more what I want to get into. So in the real world, unfortunately, a lot of the high-minded ideas about life, whether they are political philosophies, spiritual philosophies, personal development philosophies, religious philosophies, etc., go out the window. Why? Because people disagree. And so it's learning how to navigate that disagreement, which I would say is one of the trickiest and most important aspects of success in life, and therefore, yes, success with your health and well-being as well. And so we just talked about in the previous section with boundaries, right? Learning the ability to say no. But that's only really one facet of a larger picture. I wanted to talk about the more specific things first. So what happens when two people have a difference of opinion? Well, if the relationship is hierarchical, then whoever is in the position of power wins, right? So that's an easy resolution. In theory. Now, I know in reality, there are exceptions to that, right? So parent and child is an obvious example of that. As a parent, you have all the responsibility for the child. You have that power legally. They don't, right? Before you're 18, there's a lot of legal power you just don't have. And so generally, the adult, the parent, wins that conflict because they have to, right? In theory, although in reality, a lot of parents with weak boundaries and maybe, other things going on will struggle with that, especially once a child gets closer to being 18. But, in theory, ditto with, if you're the boss and you're an employee, ditto if it's, a policeman or a judge, a police person or a judge, and you're, the person in their sights or whatever it might be, right? There are hierarchical situations where you just have to go along the other person because they have power. But what about all the situations where there is not that clear hierarchy? That's more where there is trouble. Obviously, there is trouble in the area where there is hierarchy because hierarchies can be abused and frequently are. But at least in that case, the trouble is the fact that there's an abuse of hierarchy, but there's still not that much trouble about what we're going to do, right? Still, the person in charge wins. We're going to do what they say. So at least in terms of negotiating the specific conflict, it's pretty clear. But what about when that's not the case? What about if it is a voluntary relationship? What about if it's brother and sister, husband and wife, friend and friend, colleague and colleague, random stranger and random stranger in the park, whatever. And so how you deal with that is important. So people have a few different strategies, and the unhealthy ones generally tend to relate to the fight, flight, freeze, or fawn response. So one strategy, if you're in a negotiation, is to attempt to dominate. So that's the fight response, right? There are many ways to do that, bullying, intimidation, threatening people, all of those kind of things, right? That's one way you can try and negotiate conflict. So that's fight, flight, right? You can avoid the conflict. That's another thing that you can do. You can run away. This can be literal, like just literally walking away, or it can be metaphorical in the sense that you go off into your head and disappear, you withdraw. Now, there's also the freeze response. So what I would consider the freeze response is where you basically, you stop responding anything other than minimally. So it might be yep, okay, yep. I mean, that's, I would say, the closest you can get to a freeze response in practice. Although some people do completely freeze when there is a conflict, right? They become non-responsive, but that's fairly extreme. They're more, it's the partial freeze that's much more common. They become, monosyllabic, like very, very restrained, just giving very short answers. So that's another strategy. And then the last one is the fawn response. So fawn, or I've heard that described differently, but let's go with the word fawn. That is basically like a placatory attitude. Whatever you want, right? It's pleasing. It's I will go along with you, just don't hurt me, or just be nice to me. This might also be, flattering. Oh, aren't you great? And all the rest of it. Okay. Now, so those are the least healthy ways of dealing with conflict. And yet they are all quite common if someone goes into that stress response, which is common. One of the many reasons that we don't want to go into a stress response chronically all the time is so that we don't live life that way. So those aren't the options that we're picking from, right? A lot of people, especially if they have a hierarchical consciousness, they're like, is this someone who I can bully and dominate, or is this someone who I have to submit to? That's not great. That's not what we want, right? So what other options are there? So another option is to negotiate, right? And this can be, in various different ways, but usually it ultimately boils down to some kind of exchange, right? You and I don't agree, but if I give you this, you give me that. If it's just a disagreement on opinions that's purely philosophical, then, it might be a compromise. Well, I'll agree with you that people are like this. If you agree with me that people are like that, okay. Or, if it's more practical, which it often is, then it's like, I'll give you this if you give me that, right? A concession both ways.
Right, yeah, that makes sense.
Another strategy, which kind of goes a little bit of the anger one, but I'd still say it's a healthy one, is more of a influential one. So it's where you're attempting to influence someone, but rather than through any kind of intimidation, it is through charisma, right? You're not so much flattery in the sense of in a submissive posture, but more in a, if anything, I guess, again, aggressive posture. You are like trying to win them over. This can be, flirting. This can be, bowling them over with your impressive knowledge. This can be, complimenting, but in a, confident way rather than a submissive way. This can be lots of things. I did a whole course about how to influence people. It's definitely a good area of study for anyone in general, I would say, but especially if you're in a position where that's necessary, if you're in a position of any kind of authority. I would say if you're in an authority position and you can dominate and intimidate people and get away with it, because you're their boss or you're their parent or whatever, it's all the more important to learn not to do that and to learn to do it through persuasion, through making people feel good about doing what you want them to do. Of course, or selling, for instance, is an example of that. Selling is an exchange, right? You give me money and I'll give you this product or service. But, there's usually a persuasive kind of element to it.
Let's say, I was going to say, so let's say somebody is absolutely rubbish at conflict, and usually things end up, not going very well. What would be their first part? I know you've given us quite a few examples along this way, but what would be their first thing of trying to mend that part, to mend that area of themselves?
It's a great question. Well, I gave a clue about that, right? So I said that the least healthy methods, which I assume is what you mean by rubbish at conflict, correlates with the stress response. So the first thing is to learn to not go into the stress response. Now, I realize that's easier said than done, but, a lot of what I teach in general is about not going into the stress response, right? You're more likely to have issue with a conflict if you have low blood sugar and you haven't eaten in ages than if you just had a meal. Like, even very practical things like that will make a difference. If you had a good night's sleep, it's going to be a lot more easy to negotiate conflict than you haven't, right? For similar reasons. You're low in energy, so your body's more likely to go into a stress response. So generally, doing all the kind of stuff that we talk about in this podcast to not be in a chronic stress response is the best thing you can do in general. Now, there's another thing, which is so, and it's down to the first piece of advice I gave, and it's the orientation towards truth. I think that is the other part of it. So I would say I'll give a tiny bit of social commentary here and say the bedrock of the civilizations that are relatively healthy is a appreciation for truth. And so what you find is where there isn't appreciation for truth. So for instance, according to Solzhenitsyn in his very detailed book, The Gulag Archipelago, about what it was like under communist USSR, he said everyone was lying all the time to each other. And so when you're in that kind of society where everyone is lying and it's completely normal, the thing is that if you're not oriented towards truth, the only other way to resolve conflict really is through power. If persuasion doesn't work, let's say, two people have a very opposite perspective on this. Neither of them are going to be persuaded by the other. Neither are going to be flattered or, whatever by the other. Okay. So then there's a fundamental disagreement. So when there is that fundamental disagreement, you can either, the kind of default primate way of dealing with that is measuring who has the most power, right? In the animal world, that's usually who's bigger and stronger. In obviously the human world and even in other primates, it's more complex. Like a much smaller primate can intimidate a much bigger one because they are the child of the alpha, or they are allied with the alpha. So it's not always as simple as who's bigger and stronger, but it kind of comes ultimately down to force. Who can marshal the most force behind them is the one who dominates. And that is always how conflicts are resolved, where persuasion is not possible, unless there is that appreciation of truth.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because one of my guilty pleasures is some reality TV, and so they're not always in their, what did you say, what did you say? What was it? Accurate practice or accurate thinking? Because there'll be a lot of, well, I heard this, and they'll be like, yeah, well, that's not true. It's like, well, that's not the truth. You may have heard it, but what investigation have you done to know that that's a fact? You're not even talking in truth. You're talking in, I don't know if supposition is the right word, or hearsay. It's like, so, and then all these arguments happen in these conversations, and it's like stuff. So it's like, I'm so glad you brought up that point of going back to the first point, which is that accurate thinking. Where's the fact? Where's the truth in that? Because that, especially, I've got 3 kids, so especially when dealing with potential conflicts and negotiating and being the mediator in that area, it's like, okay, well, no, what's the fact? Do you know that for a fact? Did you see that? Was that said? And then if we can just bring it down to that basic level, then a lot of what needs to get resolved can get done a lot faster, and where everybody's okay with it.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think that's one of the reasons why, certain civilizations spread so successfully, is because, the Magna Carta originally, and the legal system, and the idea that objective truth actually matters, So where, there's trials to determine who's right, let's say, in a conflict, but then there's evidence, right, and facts, and there has to actually be proof. Whereas, for instance, communist USSR, they would have trials, but facts would be irrelevant, right? If you've pissed off the people in power, you're going to Siberia, or you're going to the firing squad. Like, the facts don't matter in those kind of societies, right? And so that's true societally, and it's also true interpersonally between you and I, Chrissy, and between each of us and every other person. If there's massive disagreements, so long as both people have a genuine appreciation for truth, there will always be a resolution possible. Always. Even if you don't convince each other, you can meet in the middle to some degree or agree to disagree. There's always some level of concession. And if nothing else, there is at least an appreciation for the other point of view. Because some truths are unknowable, right? So let's say the big argument is, does God exist or not? Well, it's not something that can be proven either way. So one person's very, very strongly doesn't, the other one does. But if both of them are earnestly seeking the truth, they'll have to admit to each other, well, actually, there's no evidence for either of our positions. So yours is based on faith, so is mine. fair enough. There can be a respect for each other's point of view, even if neither one wins the other person over. And that may sound like a silly thing about debating whether God exists or not. Well, there's been lots of wars fought, of thousands of people dying, in theory at least, about whose God is right? Like whose God is genuine, whose God is valid, and whose God isn't. This is hardly like such a crazy idea that there would be a conflict over it. And so, yeah, I would absolutely say that. And so I think that's one of the things that's disturbing about, very recent societal changes, is that truth is considered less important than feelings, than how people feel about something. And I understand where that's coming from. It's because people who are often highly agreeable are seeking to protect people's feelings. And I do think that's valid in the personal sphere, like I said earlier. But the problem with it from a societal point of view is what they don't realize is that if that appreciation for truth as the fundamental benchmark for mediating decisions and conflict goes away, the only thing that's left is force. The only thing that's left is who is bigger and stronger, ultimately. And so that's something that we want to be very aware of. So while the truth can be annoying, I know, because it, doesn't comport with our feelings, I think it is very, very important that we maintain that appreciation for truth and the facts, even if it's inconvenient truth to everyone, right? Even if it hurts everyone's feelings, even if no one benefits. This is the same thing the idea of the freedom of speech comes from. The idea that freedom of speech is irrelevant if it's a speech that you agree with or speech that you find reasonable. It's only if it's speech that you don't agree with, and it's only speech that you find offensive, that it needs protecting at all. Otherwise, why would it need protecting? But the problem is it's offensive or it's not true, then can be applied back to you. And then it's back to the same thing. It's only down to who's got the force, who's got the most army behind them, who's got the biggest government, who's got the biggest whatever. And so, yeah, it's a very dangerous path to go down to ignore this. So that's a little bit of societal commentary, but I don't usually do. But anyway, back to, you and your interpersonal relationships. I find I always seek truth in my conflicts with people. And I find actually, despite how it may seem if looking at media, the vast majority of people respond well to that. There's only a very small minority of people who are fundamentally uninterested in the truth, even if you attempt to pursue it with them. And those people, have to be treated as people who really you want nothing to do with on an everyday interpersonal level.
Right. I mean, you'll go back to it. I mean, truth has a big and does play a big part. And it's one of those things that, yeah, absolutely, especially in a disagreement or a conflict, if you have that common ground of truth, then you'll be able to resolve it. I would think, quickly.
Always.
And well. Yeah.
Even if you can't agree, if you don't end up agreeing, you can agree to disagree in a respectful manner.
Yeah, absolutely. No, this is a really good one, Elwyn. Really, really good. So, Elwyn, next, what is next on our most important lifestyle changes list?
So, a really important thing that helps you to, feel your best, feel younger, feel healthier, is cultivating, loving, supporting relationships. And I think the key word there is cultivating, not just having. So, yes, having them is great. I talked about this earlier. There's lots of studies to say that the less people have these, the less happy they are and the less long they live. So this is super, super crucial. But the key word, I think, is really cultivate, because we shouldn't expect this to just happen. And I feel like a lot of us do. A lot of us believe that this is just something that we're entitled to. And I actually think that's hardwired, at least from childhood. My understanding is that when we're born, we expect a certain amount of love and a certain amount of comforting and a certain amount of support and all the rest. And a lot of our, early trauma is actually based around not getting that for various reasons, which may not be anyone's fault at all. It could be for all kinds of circumstantial reasons. So it is reasonable to expect as a newborn baby to have unconditional love and all the rest of it. It's not really, reasonable as a 40-year-old. In that case, if you want to receive it, you should also be giving it, right? And so that can be a little bit trickier. So one of the things that I see is that anything that you don't prioritize, you don't work on, and you don't value will often fall by the wayside unless you have a natural talent for it. There are always exceptions, Some people don't focus on their health at all, and they still stay healthy up until a ripe old age. Some people don't focus on material success in the world, and the money just flows to them, and that's just the way they are. And then some people, they're just by the way that they naturally are with their talent, they seem to have lots of loving, supporting relationships, and that's great. And they probably think that, and each of those people who has that natural talent thinks all the people fussing about trying to get those things are silly, because it should just come naturally, usually. Like, they just don't get it. But anyway, for most of us, and I think the stats on it is that, the average person has less than one person who they're truly close to, who they trust, and who they can rely on. So, or that they feel that way. You can fact check me on that. If maybe it's 1 point something, but anyway, it's not many. And I think I'm right that at least some studies show it's less than one. So what that means is that more than 50% of people have no one, right? Or no one that they feel is the case. So this is a really big deal. And this has obviously got worse for all kinds of reasons that we've talked about. The atomization of culture. So the fact that, we can travel, a lot of people go to a new place where they don't know anyone and they never really build those strong bonds that they had from the place they left. Maybe they left that place though because they never had it in the first place. It's kind of tricky, but generally for all kinds of reasons, some of which do seem to be intentional, our culture is very isolating these days. We don't have that tight-knit community anymore. On one hand, I would say it's especially true in cities, because it's like the bigger the city you're in, the less any particular stranger that you bump into is happy to see you. If you're in a very small village in the countryside, generally if you see someone, they kind of smile and say hello. That's not the case if you're in a city. But on the other hand, if you're in a very small, isolated in the middle of nowhere in the countryside, there's actually not many people around, and maybe you won't particularly have something in common and be able to connect to those people, and so that can also leave you isolated. So it's a little bit, both can be potentially isolating. But anyway, so those are the kind of factors that stop you forming the relationship in the first place. Maybe other factors, of course, is stuff we've talked about, right? Maybe you have too firm boundaries and you push people away without realizing it, or maybe you do realize it but you can't stop. Maybe you let people in too easily, and so therefore everyone in your life ends up being someone abusive to one degree or another, and so you still don't feel that loving, safe, trusting connection. And there could be lots of other factors as well. And then the other thing, of course, is most people have one at one point or another, if not many, but then they don't prioritize it. They don't focus on it. They take it for granted. And that's why I use the word cultivate. Cultivate kind of, to me, implies both to start, but also to keep it going.
No, I think that is a key word that you have used, cultivate, because listen, I was born in Indiana, went to school in North Carolina, moved to London, moved to LA, I've been all over the place, and I've made friends in many, many, many different places. But if I don't and I'm not great at it, but, I try. One of my friends, she puts me to shame because she's always reaching out. But I know that I have also got to put that effort in. It's part of my responsibility to continue to cultivate those relationships, because I've got some amazing people in my life. And that requires me to reach out, to give them a call, to send them a message, to check in, and to keep that fire burning with them.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that can be tricky. If you're more introverted, then that can be tricky.
Yeah, it's not easy. It's not natural. But,
but it is super important. And I would say the more extroverted you are, the more important it is to you. And that's why you're extroverted. I actually believe that's kind of the root of the extroversion. And so, it's fair enough. And everyone is different. Some people need a lot of people, and some people maybe need less. And so that's okay. It's not good to compare yourself to others, but you want to have more than zero, and you want to feel good about what you have. You want to feel like it's enough, whatever it is, right? Maybe for you, that's only one or two people. If you're highly introverted, that is potentially okay, but you want to have those people who you can be intimate with. And, the definition of intimacy, it's not sexual. Intimacy, my understanding of what it means is someone you can be honest with, back to that true thing again, especially about, your vulnerabilities. Someone who you feel like you don't have to hide, you don't have to pretend, you don't have to put on a false front or anything like that. You can be your true self with them. That's my understanding of it. And so, yeah, if you have 0 people who you feel that way with, that is not good, and it will reduce your lifespan. Because if nothing else, very simply, the mammal part of you will feel like, if you have no one that is true for, that you must be in a dangerous, vulnerable position, because throughout most of our evolution, that would be true. Now, these days, you can, keep yourself alive perfectly well with, remote work and, shopping on the internet and all the rest of it. But throughout most of our evolution, if you didn't have at least a couple, and preferably quite a few of those close people in your life, you would probably die. And so you will feel as if you could die if you don't have those people, even if it's totally not true anymore. It's just the way it is. It's just the way we're wired.
Very interesting. Yeah, cultivating those relationships. If you find that you don't have very many, get out there and cultivate them. And if you do have them, reach out and tell them how much you value them, and keep that relationship going. Yeah, this is a good one, Ellen. Thank you. So, Ellen, what is next on our list of most important lifestyle changes?
So this last one, I feel like is very important and leads nicely from the previous one, which is to give to others unconditionally and be grateful for what you receive. And I'll actually add to that, it's not in my notes, it's to forgive others liberally as much as you would want to be forgiven, right? So let's start with the giving first. I think it is one of the best ways of, having those loving, supportive relationship is to focus on what you can give, but also on the same, give, so to improve the person's life, to make them happy, whatever, but also to be grateful for what they give to you, right? If you're only in a mode of giving, and I've been guilty of this, then not only is it possible, it's actually possible that the other person feels worse as a result of that, because they feel like it's an unequal relationship. There's a small minority of people who can keep taking from you and feel totally fine with it, but most people actually feel really bad. They feel like they're in your debt and they don't like it. And so, but relationships are rarely perfectly equal in terms of who gives what to who. And so I think it's very important. However, so even if, by whatever metric, obviously it's hard to judge, but you do give more to someone else, be focused on what they give you and really express your appreciation for that. And that stops that trap happening of them feeling in your debt. And because if people feel in your debt, they're going to end up feeling resentful towards you. It's weird. You think if the more you give to someone, the more grateful they'll be. It is not true. The more you give to someone, if you don't receive in return, the more resentful they'll be towards you, because they will resent being in your debt.
Yeah, it's one of the things I refer to, I talk about in my family, is that equal energetic exchange. Because even it doesn't necessarily have to be, a financial thing. It's the energy of it. It's the exchange within that.
Yeah, the value. I mean, you may, for instance, if you're someone who teaches a lot, you may say, well, I'm teaching this person a lot, and so I'm giving more value than them. But guess what? If you're a teacher, you probably really like to be listened to. So the value the person's giving in the exchange is the attentive listening, right? And so you can actually praise them for that. Wow, I've rarely had a student or whatever your relationship is who, listens as well as you. It's such a pleasure to work with someone like you. That will take that imbalance off the table to a significant degree. Do you see what I mean? Let's if it is financial and you are giving a lot of gifts to someone, you can say, "Oh, I so enjoy how much you enjoy, whatever it is, whatever you're getting a gift on. It makes me so happy to see you enjoy it." even that, I mean, it's a little bit indirect, but it's still like, oh, it lets the other person know they're getting something out of it. It's not just that they're buying me more and more stuff and I'm more and more in debt to them. They are enjoying it too. So therefore it still feels equal, right? So even in that extreme where it is monetary and one person is giving a load and one person isn't. So I think it's always possible. Now, of course, you want to make sure that this is not a pretense, that you do feel that way. If you do feel like it's a very unequal relationship, you need to either end it or address that. Unless you are at the level of enlightenment where you can give unconditionally and not feel any resentment about not getting anything in exchange. Most people are not there. So as much as it creates resentment to keep receiving and building up a debt, it also creates resentment to keep giving and to feel like you're not getting enough or anything in exchange, So giving is a tricky thing, just like conflict is a tricky thing, but I think it's a very important thing to master. So I would say, however, if you're very focused on adding value to people and you're very focused on being grateful for what they do for you, you will probably have a lot of very happy relationships because people like that. People like, obviously, to receive value from someone and they like being appreciated for whatever it is that they do. And you have to make that clear to them. So when you do your morning meditation, being aware of how grateful you are for them isn't enough. You have to tell them. You have to express it and make it clear to them and make sure that they believe you and understand all the rest of it. But that's really important.
Definitely. I think there's also something too. I mean, for me, being able to receive, that took some time to authentically receive something, whether it was a compliment, whether it was something else. It was just like, oh, wait a minute. There was, it was a little outside my comfort zone. And I had to practice that. So that was another aspect of that too, of, being able to receive something.
Me too. And I think the feeling like it's hard to receive something often is down to things that are not, bad, like in terms of you doing anything bad, like low self-esteem. But the problem is, even if the reason why you struggle to receive is because you believe you don't deserve it, if you believe you don't deserve it, then you're not going to be grateful for it. And if you're not grateful for it, then the other person doesn't feel like appreciated for what they do. So this is quite common, that it's not for any kind of withholding, but it still is perceived that way by the other person. That's why I'm really emphasizing both. Some people are good at receiving, but they're not so much focused on the value they can give to others. And some people are good at giving to others, but they're not very good at receiving. You really have to do both in order to not build up resentment in a relationship long term, is what I've observed and heard from relationship teachers.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And then I remember as well, I think it was in the healthy habits, gratitude or appreciation was in there too. So, and being able to do that effectively, not only for yourself, but to the person that you're in that exchange with, that has great value.
Yeah, and really express it to them. And then the other thing I'll just put in there, I'll put it along with it because I think it's a similar idea. And I think actually it is kind of a gift you can give to someone, is forgiveness. And yes, and not easy. And it does for some people, and it does have to be appropriate. So this is why I add, forgive something that you would maybe not want to be forgiven for, because maybe you'd want to be forgiven for anything, no matter how bad it is, but something that you would reasonably expect to be forgiven for, right? So I add that caveat in. It's funny, after I did some research for narcissism, I started to see a lot of Christian channels talk about narcissism, which is interesting. I hadn't seen that before. And I was interested about that because I think that the whole Christian philosophy of forgiveness is taken too far, of just forgiving everyone. And people who are predatory, which includes narcissistic people, love people who forgive everything because they can get away with it forever with those people. And so it was interesting to see those kind of Christian, influencers or whatever you call it, talking about how, Christianity tells you to forgive, but it doesn't mean that you put up with endless abuse, right? That there is that line of what was reasonable, and that the perhaps more condemning, judgmental aspects of Christianity have been really de-emphasized in the last century or so, but that really, it is a balance. And so I don't think in the world you want to walk around like trying to forgive everyone all the time. I think that's a recipe for, again, being taken advantage of, just like weak boundaries is a recipe for being taken advantage of. But what I'm really talking about is those loving, supportive relationships. If you've chosen to have that connection with someone, then you have basically made that choice that you will accept them flaws and all, just like they're accepting you flaws and all. And therefore, it is appropriate to forgive up until it's not. But if it's not, then it's time to end the relationship. What I see people doing is the third option, which is not forgiving and maintaining the relationship. And then what that means, what that leads to is just more and more resentment on maybe on one part, more and more guilt on the other part. Now, the one thing I will say about forgiveness as well is in some contexts, it may be better to keep it to yourself. So, for instance, maybe someone does something that triggers you, but it's not really such a bad thing, or maybe it's not a bad thing at all. It's very important to forgive them, but it might actually be counterproductive to tell them that you forgive them, because they may not see that, that they've even done anything wrong, and maybe they haven't done anything wrong, or maybe it's such a small thing that even though they have done something wrong, to bring in forgiveness is a bit of a dramatic thing for them. So I think the thing is more to do it yourself. And obviously, if the person asks, if they say, I'm sorry, then tell them that you forgive them. But otherwise, maybe letting it go might be a better way of describing it. Letting it go and accepting it's part and parcel for that person. We came up with examples that earlier when we did our personality thing. Like we talked about someone very low in conscientiousness, for instance. They're very fun, but they'll probably not be punctual. And so you have to accept that if I want that fun person in my life, I have to accept they're not going to be on time. So I forgive that, right? Or let's say you have someone highly disagreeable in your life because, you find them funny and entertaining and you like their honesty, but sometimes they hurt your feelings, right? They say things that you might consider rude or impolite. You just have to accept are going to take the rough with the smooth if that's the way that they are, right? No, it doesn't mean they, it could be abusive or whatever, but if they're just being too honest, well, that's what you like about them, right? And that's true for all of the personality traits on both sides, that if you want someone who has this particular tendency, that there is like a downside to it. And then that is just something that you need to forgive and need to be okay with.
Let me ask you this, forgiveness. Is it really about the other person, or is it more about you? And what I mean by that is whether you forgive that other person, especially if they don't even know, like, that they need forgiving. It's like in that thing of where you also have some people that say, I could never forgive that. For me, that also speaks to like, then they're going to hold on to that emotion and that thing forever and ever and ever. And it's going to sit in their nervous system. It's going to sit in their cellular memory, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I just wanted to ask what your viewpoint is on that.
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely implied by, you might not even want to tell them, right? That it's definitely more for you. Another reason why you might not want to tell them is because you don't want to condone their behavior, So let's say, someone horrifically sexually assaulted you or whatever. You might not want to forgive them because you don't believe that they really are sorry. They don't have contrition. They don't have genuine remorse. And so you don't want to say it to them because you don't want to let them off the hook. And that's fine, but it's about the feeling in you that matters, not them. So that's the other extreme of why you might not tell them. On one hand, you might not tell them because they haven't done anything wrong. You just got upset. On the other hand, you might not want to tell them because you don't want to let them off the hook. Because the problem with excess forgiveness is it does lead to a continuing the cycle. I've pointed this out. I don't think it's a coincidence that the Catholic priests kind of scandal thing, where when one of them is found to be, abusing all these children, that they move them on to a different congregation and don't tell them about it. That's an attitude of forgiveness, right? That's excessive forgiveness to me, right? So, that's, you are absolved, you are forgiven, but it's not addressing, but they're going to do it again, right? And so in that case, maybe harsh judgment is actually more appropriate than forgiveness to stop that person repeating that behavior.
Yeah.
And so that's what I mean. That's why I think in some cases, keeping it to yourself is important, because of what you just said. That is the whole point. It is for you, not them.
Yeah, because how I see it as well is forgiveness is not about, and to your point that you were just saying as well, forgiveness is not about condoning the behavior. It's about you personally being able to let go of the experience and move on from it and heal.
Yeah, I do agree, but I will say, if you say to someone you forgive them, especially,
so you don't need
especially
to sometimes.
if they have a predatory, abusive mindset, they will 100% read that as condoning the behavior.
Yeah. No, that's a really interesting things to talk about. And that movie Spotlight was so good about that whole church stuff. Yeah, shout out to them for that
situation. And that was made famous through that. But I think, to be honest, it happens through a lot of different institutional religions. It happens through many cults. It happens through many organizations. It happens actually in the education system a lot. I think there's a lot of it, but I do think there is more of it where the institution has an attitude of forgiving, which ends up being condoning and letting it happen again. So that was my only point.
Elwin, thank you. This has been another wonderful, comprehensive list of the most important lifestyle changes. So I just wanted to, I know we've finished. We've gone through the list now. Are there any final thoughts that you'd like to share with those who have joined us today?
One thing I'll say is, sorry if it wasn't stuff you're expecting. Obviously regular exercise, detoxification, stuff like that. Is important as well. We covered maybe a little bit of that in the daily habits, but I wanted, as I said at the beginning, to share things that are not normally talked about. And I'd like to hear, what you have to say as well. If you think there's anything along the lines of what I'm talking about that I haven't thought about, that Chrissy hasn't thought about, that is super important, I'd like to hear it. And the other thing, I keep saying this now, but please share it. If you think this resonates with you and you know anyone else who it might resonate with, please share it with them. And if sharing a whole 2+ hour episode is too much, then remember we have clips of everything now. If you look at the playlist, I'm sure we'll have clips for this episode up as well, and maybe just share a clip with people of what you think is the most relevant. We really appreciate your help in spreading the word about this podcast.
Yeah, I second that. Yes, please do leave your comments below. Please make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss an episode. And, just thanks for joining us. Thanks for being here. We do this for you. And as always, we are here to bring you more education, more of the things that you want to know about. So let us know what it is that you want to know about. So on that note, we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode. And one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there. Or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.